My intention for today is that each one of you are able to make breakthroughs with a challenge that to date has just had you stuck. And this is a process that I found out about a few years ago when Hal Gregersen out of MIT's Leadership Center published a book called Questions Are the Answer. And I've used it in work settings, I've used it with community groups, I've used it in my own family. And it really, as Barbara said, is about that power of uncovering questions, of thinking in new ways, of bringing people into your process so that you can have the benefit of their perspective, bringing new lenses to things. In his work, Hal Gregersen says that it's the edges of our network where we find ourselves in situations that cause us to see things differently, that cause new questions to come up for us. Those times when we're somewhat uncertain, where we're kind of uncomfortable, and we're faced with a situation that we just don't know what to do. And what we thought was true is apparently becoming very untrue. And in those situations, it's where we're able to, if we can, have the courage, be still, be quiet, listen to what's happening around us, and lean into that discomfort so that those new questions will emerge. Now, today, you don't have to wonder what the questions are because we've got an exercise outlined for you. It's trademarked by Hal Gregersen. It's called the Question Burst. It's a short, simple exercise. The first step is that we will, each one of you will have an opportunity to first describe your problem for 2 minutes. And then 4 minutes, your colleagues in your breakout group will pepper you with questions. And during that time, you can say nothing. Absolutely, like zip it. And when you are saying nothing, then you will be writing. You won't have time to talk, you'll be writing so fast. So Gregersen says when we find ourselves stuck, it's typically because we're asking the wrong question. And there's nothing worse than having the right answer to the wrong question. So truly, by opening ourselves up, by leaning into discomfort, we're going to have a chance to share a challenge that each of us has encountered and is struggling with, and then have resources around us to help us address new questions. As I mentioned earlier, Hal Gregersen wrote a book. In his book, he highlights what kinds of things we should be thinking about so that we find ourselves stuck less often. And so he asks us to consider, how often is it that we really put ourselves in strikingly different places than we are typically in? Now with COVID, understand that that's a little bit difficult these days to physically get in places that we're not typically in, but perhaps using the virtual environment to reach out to fringes of your network and incorporate people into your conversations who you don't typically have the chance to interact with. And to that point, how many times do you put yourselves in situations where you're meeting people who are completely different than you, where you are wrong more often than you're right? And when's the last time you found yourself dead wrong about something? Because it's those times where we're vulnerable enough to find ourselves where we don't have all the answers, because none of us really does, where we are relying on the insight and knowledge from other people to help us then move in new directions. So as I mentioned, we're each going to go through an exercise. We'll break out into groups of 3. And in those groups of 3, we'll go through first a description of one person's problem or challenge that they're facing. And so you'll have 2 minutes to describe that challenge. And one of your team members who's going to pepper you with questions should set their clock or their watch to 2 minutes so they can let you know when that's up. Then the 2 other colleagues in your group will pepper you with questions based on your situation for the next 4 minutes. And during that time, the person with the challenge will just write down every question that comes their way. And the ideal is to get 15 to 20 questions. And then you'll repeat that process so that each person in the small group has a chance to get some new thinking around their particular challenge. So it's really super important that somebody take the job of timekeeper and that we stick to the 6 minutes, just so that everybody gets a fair shake at having their challenge addressed and having the gift of new questions from their teammates. So in order to help you understand what this looks like, Barbara and Nancy and I will go through the exercise for you so that you can get a feel and see what this exercise looks like. And this is a real live problem. As Barbara mentioned, I have a boutique consulting firm in the people and culture space. I recently was fortunate enough to sign a strategic partnership with an HR tech vendor who's a leader in their space of analytics. And I'm super excited as my firm grows to add new HR partners, strategic partners to my ecosystem of partners. And so what I really would love some help on is, what are the kinds of questions that I should be asking myself, that I should be asking future partners as I think about this growth and thinking about creating an ecosystem of HR partners? Barbara, Nancy?
Well, I guess first I would suggest you need to think about the structure of your partnerships. Will they be exclusive? Will they be exclusive by expertise? Or will you have agreements, and will that agreement be the same? Will you have different levels of agreements? Will you have a few that are real key partners, or some that are more, that are not as core to perhaps what you're doing, and that you'll want to look at differently?
Yeah, and I think about, Chris, I think about, especially in the environment that we're in, what are the expectations of these partners? You know, we think about ED&I, equity, diversity, and inclusion. You know, what are your expectations of your partners around those themes? What is your expectation around, you know, their board? Are you going to, you know, kind of set a threshold in terms of diversity on the board? I think about, you know, what does an ideal client or partnership to you look like? What are the values of those partnerships that are most important to you and in what you're trying to create?
Well, and to that ED&I component, that might be important, for example, if you're looking to do work with governmental agencies. So that, in terms of the type of clients, who's your target audience? And actually, do you want to have a global client base or more national? If it's global, those partnerships, there's certain people with real global skills. That's a very different skill set and challenges that companies face relative to just really national. And there's different price points that certain partners may charge, and you may want to have people at different price points that you would want to refer in. And do you refer them in? Is it branded under your name, current name, or is that a separate umbrella entity so that you preserve your brand? Because what happens if you bring someone in and they, you know, do you want to make sure you mitigate risk to damaging your brand? And how do you navigate those types of decisions?
And what are some of the financial expectations as well in the financial arrangements? You know, if you are in a partnership, what does that split look like, or that financial arrangement look like? If you're pulling more weight or doing more of the work versus your partnership. And my sense is that those will be fluid among all the different partnerships. I don't know.
If you build processes together, who owns the trademark, or you know, what's the proprietary IP issues around any of those types of things?
Right.
Awesome.
I just have to jump in for a second, because it's, you know, what I do every day. So don't say anything. But the exit, like, first of all, what I haven't heard yet is the real reason why you want partners and why you're using that term. Okay, and Nancy and Barbara covered this, but why are you considering a partnership as opposed to some other model? Who's going to have control, or don't you care? All right, and if somebody doesn't meet your expectations, or intentionally or not, what happens if one of these partners gets sick, or, you know, God forbid, dies, or wants to move to New Zealand, or all of those things? But the real question is like, what is it that you personally want to accomplish? And are there other alternatives that you have considered?
Awesome. Thank you so much, you guys. So that's the 4 minutes. That's what it looks like, right? It's really straightforward. It's super easy. So I encourage you to, after the session, take a look at your questions. Hopefully you've got 15, 20 of them, and find commonalities among them. Group them into common themes. And then once you've got those themes, maybe you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 of them. Identify the 1 or 2 that are creating a new way of looking at that problem, at that challenge, a new way of investigating or exploring it further. And then once you've got 2, look at and discern which one makes you most uncomfortable. The one that makes you most uncomfortable, the one which kind of makes you squeeze your glutes a little bit, is the one that you should tackle, the one that you should explore further, because that's the one where you're going to have the greatest opportunity for learning. So I encourage you to work through your questions, move them into themes. From those themes, pick the 1 or 2 and then narrow it down to the one that you're going to commit to investigate further to help tackle that challenge that you've been facing.
You know, as I was thinking about today's topic, it reminded me of a term that many of you may have heard, you know, back in the early 2000s. The term is unknown unknowns, which are really things that you don't know, but that you need to find out. They're complex and unidentified blind spots. And by ourselves, you know, we may not know enough to ask the right questions or identify our knowledge gaps that will allow us to move forward or uncover the best outcome. You know, learning to ask good questions is a process, but keep in mind there is, and we say this all the time in the Women's Forum, there is no wrong, silly, or stupid question. So stay curious and open to questions from those around you, because what it does is it leads to a lifetime of learning and contagious inspiration. So we're going to share in the recap some of the slides, the content from Chris's slides. But Chris, maybe you want to just give, 30 seconds on, if women want to learn more about you, how we can do that.
Sure. So please do reach out to me on LinkedIn and let me know how it is that your challenge is progressing. But you can find me at BNear Global, just B, N-E-A-R, global.com. And we're focused on people and culture within organizations. Getting culture right is hard. So we created a framework around truth, trust, and optimism to allow you, your people, and your company to perform at your peak. So look forward to working with some of you in the future. And I encourage you to use this framework in your community, with your teams at work, within your family. And remember to be wrong, be uncomfortable, and be quiet, because in the quiet time is when the new questions come.